Americans for Limited Government. Joining me today is Rick Manning, the president of Americans for Limited Government. And Rick, we want to look back on the year 2021 and really the big story, and there's really only one coming from Americans for Limited Government, and that is Biden's failed presidency. There are so many aspects of his presidency that have gone wrong and so much that is going wrong in our country right now. So let's just start off with what could be the biggest one. I won't do the sort of countdown because, I mean, they're all so bad. But one that you have really felt very passionate about is what happened in Afghanistan. So why don't you tell me why this is such a marker of his failed presidency?
Yeah, the Afghanistan is a demarcation in American history where an American president, the commander-in-chief, decided to leave people in the field, abandoned them in a planned abandonment, who actually, for no reason, it wasn't not because under any military pressure, for simply a political decision, set an arbitrary deadline, and left Americans and our allies stranded. It is Joe Biden's Katrina, right, to do a George W. Bush reference, because you never recover from that. Once the rest of the world knows you will abandon your own people, your own allies in the field, once they know that, and you'll do it for political purposes, first of all, people in the rest of the world don't trust you anymore because they know you're going to leave, and they can't trust you. And they know that those who are helping you in country are going to be abandoned and won't be able to depend upon you to get them out. So you end up with a totally different relationship with people on the ground. It fundamentally changes our relationships with our allies, and who now have to question, well, the U.S. said that they'd do something, but do they really mean it? Will they do it? There are lots of ways to get out of Afghanistan. Joe Biden chose the absolute wrong way. What's more, it demonstrated to the world and to our own armed forces. If you're in the armed forces and you know that the government's willing to leave you behind, when our credo is no man left behind, I mean, how do you do that? And so it is truly a turning point in terms of our relations with the world. And quite honestly, as devastating as those images were, as horrible as it was, having 13 of our armed service members die in an attack that was done by somebody who had previously been in, and up until our abandonment of it, had been in a prison that we ran at Bagram Air Force Base. And when we left Bagram Air Force Base, that person got out as a result, and then strapped munitions onto them and blew themselves up, killing 13 Americans and hundreds of Afghanis. It's reprehensible what was done. And, it's going to take a lot of work to rebuild America's place in the world, our prestige in the world. And once again, that doesn't mean you have to be stuck in Afghanistan for the rest of your life. But what it means is people have to depend on Americans, depend on our word. And when our word is no good, suddenly the world becomes a much more dangerous place. And I think it really was a tipping point in terms of making the world a much more dangerous place and making America a significantly less important presence in making certain in the world and making certain that bad actors don't do bad things.
And Rick, we still don't have a report that was required by the State Department on the vetting of all of these Afghan refugees who came into our country following that whole debacle in August. Several senators on the Republican side have written letters to the State Department demanding that, we need to know, we need answers. Were these people fully vetted? What is the status? So there's just so much that was left undone or done incorrectly by this administration.
Yeah, Kat, I mean, I think you know that, and hopefully the viewers know that I got the opportunity to work with some people who were trying to get people out. And it was horrendously difficult to get people who legitimately had been allies, legitimately, they were interpreters. You know what that means? They spoke English. And yet somehow we did manage to get out about 100,000 people who don't speak English. I don't know how they were being interpreting or being helpful, but to be an interpreter speaking English seems to be one of the prerequisites. So you ended up with it was a battle with the Biden administration, with the State Department, to try to get people who legitimately were our allies, whose lives were in danger, whose families' lives were in danger, to get them out, while at the same time, somehow hundreds of thousands, 100,000 people got out and we can't figure out how they got on the planes.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
That's literally what happened. And I believe we'll never find out, because the people responsible will never let us know.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. But get down to it. There were people who got out, who should have gotten out. There are people who are still there who we should get out. There are still Americans on the ground. We need to get them out. But the fact that we left the way we did, it left a sour taste in all Americans' mouths, but worse, it told the rest of the world, it emboldened Russia, it emboldened China, it emboldened Iran, it emboldened all the people who've been troublemakers and people who've created crises after crises around the world. It emboldened them to say, America won't stand up. And they tell the people who they're negotiating with in other countries, don't depend on America. You saw what happened in Afghanistan. That's the damage Joe Biden did. That's why I call it his Katrina moment, because I don't think he ever recovers from it.
And what is the damage that Joe Biden and his administration have done in terms of the Middle East and Iran, and obviously affecting our energy?
Afghanistan kind of plays into the Middle East situation. And, here's what's happened in the Middle East. The Biden administration, continuing the Obama administration policy, have really gone all in to try to court the mullahs in Iran, who are repressing their people, who are basically abusing the women in their population, killing any dissent, literally killing any dissent. But Obama and now Biden apparently believe that America's future in the Middle East is in Iran. Well, the Iranians aren't exactly all that open to that. They've already got deals with Russia. They've got deals with China, and they don't really want to have, but they're placating, kind of playing footsie with the Biden administration. But here's what's happened as a result of that. Saudi Arabia is the target of Iran's aggression in the Middle East. Iran's running multiple proxy wars, putting different rebel groups, pitting them against Saudi interests, all surrounding Saudi Arabia. And the Biden administration has effectively withdrawn support for the Saudis in the Middle East. We've started to limit. In fact, we withdrew some of the missile defense shields that we provided them. We're not resupplying the missile defense shields that they currently have. And there are literally hundreds of drones that are flying into Saudi territory that are having to be shot down by these missile defense vehicles, using up the capacity that they have. And we're not selling them the arms to defend themselves. Why this matters is because we saw, President Trump engaged in something called and negotiated the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, for the first time, broke the Arab insistence that the rebels, the terrorists who control Palestinian territory, whether it be Hezbollah or Hamas, that the terrorists who control that territory, that the peace process in the Middle East not go through those terrorists who won't recognize Israel's right to exist. And so he set that Abraham Accords actually changed the power dynamic in the Middle East, and was a pathway to peace. While the Saudis didn't sign on to that, the fact that the United Arab Emirates did, which is on the other side, which is Israel is on the Mediterranean Ocean side of the Middle East. Arab Emirates, UAE, is on the other side of Saudi Arabia. So you have to fly over Saudi Arabia to get from Israel to UAE. Saudi Arabia opened their airspace so those flights could happen. Saudi Arabia was absolutely 100% on board with that occurring. And so Saudi Arabia became a massive peace partner in terms of actually solving the Middle East crisis rather than continue perpetuating it. And Biden has done everything he can to undermine that. He withdrew arms from the Saudis. He declared the Iranian-backed rebels, the Houthis, in Yemen, which is adjacent to Saudi Arabia. He's allowed them, basically declared them not to be terrorists, and is allowing Iran to basically run that rebel movement against Saudi Arabia. And so there's this massive fight going on, and it's really pitting Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, UAE, and the government of Yemen at this point against Iranian interests. And that is, and we've chosen the other side, and Saudi Arabia knows it. Why does that matter?
How does
Saudi Arabia has turned back on the United States on oil?
Right. That's what I was getting to. How does this matter to people at the gas pump? Is this affecting and leading to these high gas prices that are killing all of us?
Most people saw Joe Biden called up the Saudi prince, and who is actually very pro-Western and is attempting to modernize Saudi Arabia. Called him up and said, "Hey, can you guys begin to pump more oil? We've kind of cut our own throat by making it more difficult to pump oil here. So can you guys pump more oil and help us out and lower gas prices?" And the Saudis told him no. And the Saudis told him no for a simple reason. They don't view Joe Biden as being an ally of Saudi Arabia. So why would they help him out? It is a real change in the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, which is dangerous because not only does it affect oil prices, but it affects the petrodollar. And not to get too detailed in terms of that kind of monetary system, but currently, and since the OPEC embargo, all oil is sold in dollars. You have to use dollar-denominated currency to buy oil. Oil runs the world, and so if anybody wants to buy oil, has to use dollars, and that makes the U.S., our currency, the dollar, the currency that is the dominant currency in the world. It's called the world reserve currency. One of the advantages of that is all these countries in the world are always buying dollars. How are they doing that? They're buying treasury bonds. They're buying our debt. And they buy our debt because it converts to dollars. And so they're essentially buying dollars in order to be able to buy oil and to buy other goods and services around the world because of the petrodollar. The moment Saudi Arabia has a deal with China that says, gee, we're not going to sell you oil in dollars, we're going to sell you it in yuan, the Chinese currency, all that falls apart. And suddenly you can buy oil in yuan. And guess what, folks? All those people are buying our debt around the world. At that point, they don't need to buy our debt. And they don't need dollars in the same way. And the interest rates are going to go up, and it will be disastrous in terms of the interest owed on our debt, which is at 29 trillion now. And it's so folks, Saudi Arabia matters. And Joe Biden has declared a Cold War on Saudi Arabia. And the effect of that is disastrous. Donald Trump set up the Abraham Accord and created an environment where the Middle East would solve itself, because the Arab states would pressure the Palestinians into a settlement, into accepting Israel's right to exist, and end the nonsense. And guess what, folks? That all went away. And Biden wiped it away starting on day one, because everything in Biden's mind, everything Donald Trump did had to be bad. Hence, he had to wipe it out. The Abraham Accords still exist and they're still strong, but the U.S. is not part of that agreement. As an agreement between Israel and other nations. And that's the bulwark that's been put up to defend Israel and those nations against the Iranians and their proxies attempt to take over the Middle East and create their own caliphate.
Rick, the other area where the Biden administration has been a huge failure is in the supply chain crisis. It is ongoing. It's been going on really since last spring. And a couple of months ago, Joe Biden got up and gave comments at an event where he tried to claim that it's all over. We solved it. I went in and I asked the dock workers at Long Beach in California to work 24/7. Everything's back to normal, folks. And obviously he was saying those things in preparation for the Christmas holiday shopping season, wanting to reassure everyone. But here we are. Christmas has come and gone, and there were still supply chain problems. People can't get pet food. One of the biggest problems right now is getting the little cat foods, the tin, the aluminum that makes those cans is in short supply. Other items for their dogs and cats. People can't feed their pets. And you know, Rick, during the pandemic, the number of people in the United States that went and got pets, it was a 3% increase in pet ownership. So we have more Americans than ever owning pets. They can't get pet food. So, okay, that may not be the crisis, but other things are also affected.
I think pet food. Listen, I think not being able to get pet food is a pretty big crisis.
Yeah.
I can't feed my cat. My cats are members of my family. And if I can't provide them with food, that's a big problem for me. And that makes me mad. And so that's not a trivial problem. But, you know, let me tell you how they solved the supply chain crisis, just so you know. What they went to the shipping companies and they told them, set anchor further away from Long Beach, further away from Los Angeles. Run your ships slower across the Pacific Ocean, so we don't have as much of a backlog. So that isn't solving the supply chain crisis. That is basically just making it so the supply chain crisis is elongated and you have less apparent supply chain crisis. It's kind of like saying, putting up a picture of toilet paper on the shelves and saying, see, there's plenty of toilet paper there, when in fact there's only 2 rolls on the shelves. That's the kind of fraudulent kind of approach that is. He could have solved the supply chain crisis because it's only partially a market-based crisis. It's largely a crisis based on the inability to ship stuff from our West Coast ports inland. It's not a problem of getting it from off of ships and lack of effort there. It's a problem of what to do with it once you get it off the ships, because the warehouse storage facilities filled up, and the warehouse storage facilities filled up because a large number of trucks were not allowed to actually pick up cargo in California due to the passage of a law which makes it so independent owned truck drivers are not allowed to pick up cargo in California. And so a large part of the trucking fleet ended up getting knocked out in terms of being able to take cargo from California to the rest of the country. That's what happened. And he did nothing about that. He could have gone in and declared an emergency and overrode the California state law and said, no, this is a interstate commerce issue. You don't get a right to screw up the interstate commerce in this country based on stupid laws. And we're going to override that and sue us. He could have done that and you would solve this problem. He could have put military trucks in play to have military trucks for a short time, relieve the backlog by putting more trucks in the field. That would have made sense. Going and telling dock workers to work longer hours, by the way, it's still not working 24/7, according to people I know who work the docks in California, but telling dock workers they need to work longer hours is interesting. But if there's no way to put the cargo, then there's absolutely nothing. What are they doing those 24 hours? Because there's nowhere to put the cargo. So Joe Biden lied about fixing it. The problem is big government, and California's iteration of that in a giveaway to the environmentalists in terms of requiring all trucks to be at least 3 years old, no more than 3 years old based on environmental standards. And on the second hand, the giveaway to the unions, the Teamsters, to try to get rid of the independent owner truck drivers in California. Those two things are if you solve those two problems and you basically wipe those problems away, this problem dissolves. This isn't a free market problem. This is a controlled trucking market problem. And the U.S. government, through the Department of Transportation, has an absolute right to do that. They should do it. The Commerce Clause demands that it be done. And the fact that Joe Biden continues to sit on his hands, eating his gruel without having any idea what's going on is it's one of the biggest failures, because, folks, they're going to blame capitalism for the supply chain problems. Capitalism isn't the problem. It's government controls that are the problem, that have put a kink into the entire system. And once you break the supply chain, it takes a while for it to basically reconnect. But they've broken it at a key breaking point, and they did it. The state of California is the ones who did it, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is the ones who allowed it.
Rick, and we've talked about this a lot in the last few days. The other big area where Joe Biden has failed this nation is in his response to the ongoing pandemic and COVID. So many aspects there to talk about. The first thing we want to talk about is the mandates. That has just been a huge source of confusion and caused all sorts of disruption throughout the economy. Do you want to address that? I mean, it's in the courts, and it seems every day I see a different headline, a different court, an appeal, and I can't keep track day to day what is going on. I don't know how employers are supposed to navigate this.
Supreme Court's going to be dealing with some aspect of the vaccine mandates. They'll hear arguments at the beginning of January. So Supreme Court is going to hear arguments on it, and presumably will give some kind of preliminary decision pretty rapidly. The absurdity of the vaccine mandates is that they're saying right now, their claims are that we're having problems in hospitals and shortages in hospitals. Well, guess what? When you force hospitals and hospital systems to fire 10 to 20% of their workers based on people not being vaccinated, shock. You've got a shortage of workers. You've got a shortage. The reports coming out of the hospitals are they've got plenty of beds, but they don't have enough workers to actually take care of the people, that many beds, because they've gotten rid of them. And this isn't, and it's obscene that the Biden administration, through their kind of almost myopic view that vaccinating everybody is the only way to save the world from COVID, have effectively exacerbated the problem with COVID. Because what they haven't been doing, first of all, getting rid of all the healthcare workers. What a stupid idea. How stupid do you have to be to come up with that as an idea? Secondly, guess what, folks? We have had treatments sitting in FDA for months and months and months. There's no full speed ahead in terms of approving treatments. And in fact, just yesterday, Governor Larry Hogan from Maryland issued an executive order that he said, I can't believe I have to issue this. But he actually did an executive order telling every Maryland hospital, every Maryland doctor, that they have to start implementing treatments and giving people treatments for COVID, as opposed to sitting on their hands and not doing anything and just basically rolling the dice and say, oh, you're sick, let's see what happens. So, that's how bad it is. The idea of treating people has been basically strangled by our FDA, by the CDC, by Dr. Fauci, because ultimately the Democrats and the public health, I hesitate to call them officials, the public health tyrants want people to be in fear because fear is their power, and that's what they're trying to do. And that is and so we're going to see a real battle over treatments. And we have to fight them tooth and nail. And the big fight in February is going to be whether or not the U.S. Congress will fund the Biden vax mandates. Because no matter what the Supreme Court does, we've seen that Biden has not followed what they tell him. They didn't follow the immigration rules in terms of the return to Mexico policy. They said, "Oh yeah, we're following it." Then they didn't. So they don't necessarily care what the Supreme Court says. So let's see what happens when we say no money for the vax mandates, and they try to follow it, and we stand just as Congress sought to impeach President Trump over considering not sending money to Ukraine that had been authorized, considering whether to ask for rescission from Congress, which is perfectly within his rights, just as Congress impeached President Trump over that. In 2023, if this president doesn't follow a specific funding prohibition in terms of enforcing the vax mandates, impeachment will occur on January 4, 2023, because of a failure to follow the law. And Joe Biden will be held accountable. There'll never be enough votes to impeach, but there'll be a big fight about it, because ultimately, the president is not a tyrant. He serves at the will of the Congress based on the impeachment clause. He also serves at the will of the Supreme Court, which has actual powers. And if he violates Supreme Court orders and he violates the congressional mandates, he'll end up being, at the very least, the Democrats will have to defend blatantly unconstitutional behavior, and they'll be held accountable as well. So, folks, this is a real deal. This is a real fight. We're heavily engaged. You can tell, quite passionate about it. We have to win this fight, and we have to get the Republicans to stand up, get a backbone, and tell Joe Biden, we will not fund the vaccine mandates. We will not fund the vaccine mandates. We will not fund the vaccine mandates. And tell him that, vote that way, force the Congress to do that, and in order to keep the government running, and let the Democrats argue that they don't want to defund the vaccine mandates based on wanting to keep the government running, the rest of the government running, and they're willing to shut it down over that. They will lose. And this country will be safer, more secure, and Congress will have exercised its Article 1 authorities over a president who doesn't seem to think that anything matters except for the tip of his pen and the ink that comes off it.
And Rick, we also cannot discuss the failed Biden presidency without discussing the border security. That has been probably one of the biggest issues of concern for our members this year. Why can't we shut down that border and stop the flow of illegals coming into our country? At so many levels, this has been a fail. He's letting them in. He's not testing them. There's no requirements that they be vaccinated, yet legal American citizens are being forced to get vaxxed. There's so many aspects here where he has simply failed to do his duties as the president of this country. Do you want to discuss some of the failures there in terms of border security?
Yeah, I actually don't view this as a Biden failure. I view this as an imposition of Biden's policy. Biden ran, we have a president, we have a Homeland Security director who's for open borders, who doesn't believe we should have any border control at all. They've sent an open invitation to Central and South America and elsewhere to people to come north. And as a result, we have record numbers coming across our border. Big surprise. They had a Justice Department, while they backed off on this a little bit, we're planning on giving $450,000 per family that supposedly were harmed by the policy that separated parents and children at the border, when in fact that policy was designed to make certain that the people who were actually saying they were the parents of children actually were their parents and weren't human traffickers, which was the case quite a bit of the time. So we had a policy in place under Trump that was making certain the children were protected from human traffickers, and who we had no way of identifying if they were really their parents or not. And so we were protecting that. We were trying to do due diligence to make sure we weren't sending kids into slavery, into sexual abuse, into being prostituted out, and all sorts of horrible things. But that's what Trump was doing. And yet the Department of Justice wants to pay people because we were doing that, and pay illegals $450,000 up to $1 million each on that kind of based on that, and the ACLU lawsuit that resulted. So guess what, folks? This is their policy. When you tell people you've got a reward, you've got the golden ticket. You just need to get your foot into the river, into the Rio Grande River, and you get the golden ticket. People who live in abject poverty are going to take that golden ticket. One thing that came out just this last week, and I think it's important, President of Guatemala was interviewed, and he was asked. Remember, Kamala Harris is in charge of the border, and she's focused on the root causes of the border crisis, and talking about all the international relations stuff she's going to do to deal with that. President of Guatemala hasn't been talked to Kamala Harris but one time when she showed up in his country. She hasn't been in constant contact with the Guatemalan government trying to work at the root causes, because they want illegal immigration to occur because they believe they are importing future Democrat voters and people who live in America, who've experienced, essentially are rejecting them. And so they need to replace people, and they're trying to replace people with folks they believe will vote 2-1 for them and create a permanent majority. That's what they're doing. It's what they're doing. This isn't a flaw. This is a feature of their policy. And once again, it's up to Congress to force them to violate the law by not doing it. It's up to Congress to say, you will build the wall, provide the money, direct that money, and tell the Department of Homeland Security they will build the wall. And direct our Army Corps of Engineers that they will build the wall. And in doing that, force the Biden administration to defy them, which would be an impeachable offense. Ultimately, that's what Congress needs to do. They need to get some guts. I was using a different body part, but let's just stick with guts. They need to get some guts and stand up to this guy and stop sending out press releases and start fighting.
Rick, the last area where I have identified that the Biden administration has really failed America is just in terms of security and crime. Just this past week, U.S. Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, who represents a district in Pennsylvania, she was carjacked and robbed in broad daylight in South Philly. And the irony here is she was one of the congresswomen, she's a Democrat, who co-sponsored legislation that would have required, instead of sending police officers on emergency calls, it would have been sending mental health experts to crisis calls. And there were more than 200 Democrats in the House of Representatives who co-sponsored this legislation. And now she is a victim of a violent crime in her own state. And the question is, when are these Democrats going to wake up and realize that their policies are leading to this very unsettling rise in crime, especially in our big cities?
They aren't going to realize that. The only way they realize that is when the people start abandoning those cities and when they start getting voted out of office because of the policies they're imposing. What we're seeing in places like Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, you can name New York City, you can name the cities that are controlled by Democrat machines that have basically made it so if you get arrested for a crime, property crime in particular, you're immediately released. Even a violent crime, you're pretty much released without bail. And in those places, crime's going up. Guess what? You arrest somebody in California, a simple example. The law has been changed to make it so if you commit a crime, a property crime that's less than $950, you essentially are just set free. And they've basically bumped it down to a misdemeanor, and you might get arrested, but you get set free. Well, how many police resources can be placed in trying to solve those crimes? So now we have smash and grab gangs that are going all over California, and from Rodeo Drive up to San Francisco, going into places where, retail outlets, and not just there, but Thousand Oaks and elsewhere in suburban California, and busting into jewelry stores, busting into high-end department stores, and even busting into Walgreens and CVS and 7-Elevens, and just clearing shelves and walking out with stuff. And the gunman is gangs. They steal stuff. They harm people who try to work there and try to protect the property. And everybody says, oh, well, they're insured. Well, guess what, folks? You encourage crime, you get crime. You say you want, and that's what the Democrats have done. They've opened up the doors to the prisons. They've opened up the doors. They've said we're not going to put people in jail. And people like the LA County Sheriff has come out and said, we can't protect you. So if you need to get a concealed carry license, we will approve concealed carry licenses in a place where you never could get a concealed carry license before, because law enforcement knows that they cannot protect you. This is a combination of George Soros funded district attorneys who basically, this is a war on property. They're communists. They don't believe private property should exist. And as a result, they're allowing people to steal it as a redistribution of wealth measure. And now people like Nancy Pelosi are aghast that this is happening in her district in San Francisco. But guess what, Nancy? This is what you created. This is what your party created. This is what Gavin Newsom created. This is what Kamala Harris created. We can't ignore the fact that Democrat policy of turning everybody, making property crimes not a crime at all, results in people committing property crimes. And as far as the Philadelphia mayor, it was repugnant what he said when he said, oh, the problem is we need more gun control. I'm sorry. That is pathetic, because crime was under control before you eliminated the prison sentences and 3 strikes and you're out, and added on penalties for illegal use of a gun in a crime. Crime was somewhat under control when we had bail systems that kept violent criminals off the streets and actually treated property crimes like they were actually criminal offenses. To try to impose gun control in an environment where the police are telling you that they can't defend you is obscene, because essentially that's turning their citizens into nothing more than marks for the mobs on the streets. And it is a dereliction of duty for those who want to do that. So, but that's the normal response by the Democrats, is we create a crime problem, and now the problem is the fact that individuals have a right to defend themselves. Sorry, folks, you don't get to get away with that. The crime problem is on you. It's on the policies you've changed. And it's time to start electing district attorneys who actually prosecute the laws that are on the books and put people back in jail.
Well, thank you, Rick. I really appreciate all of you watching. If you like what you're seeing, definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd love to have more of you subscribing. We know a lot of you watch. You're not always a subscriber. If you subscribe, you'll get notifications on when we do lives and when we put out new videos. And we just hope that you've enjoyed what we're talking about. We're advocates for limited government, and we will see you next time on an Americans for Limited Government live stream. And have a great afternoon, everyone. One moment. Let me get our video.